Welcome to Psychology in the Wild, the podcast where we try to make sense of and even get through the chaos of everyday life. I'm Erin Shrimpton.
And I'm Dr. Gemma Lee Roberts.
So Gemma, tell me, what has been wild with you this week?
Well, I can't quite believe we are back thinking about New Year's resolutions. How have we got through another year? That's my first wild point on that front. Like, seriously, how are we here again? But secondly, how am I still thinking about this? We talk about this every year, you and I, not in the podcast setting, but you and I talk about this every year.
Yeah.
How am I still even thinking about this topic? For me, this is like the wild stuff that is taking over the most. I'm trying to think about my 2025, but I seriously despise New Year's resolutions. They are not my cup of tea.
I am so with you there. Could not be more on the same page as you. I just feel like at this time of year, especially in the UK and Ireland, where the weather's grim, it's dark, it's cold, you know, it just never really, for me, it never really feels like the right time to be, you know, spurring yourself on to achieve more. It feels like the right time to be being kind to yourself and hunkering down. So the thing is, also, it's funny that you said that we're thinking about New Year's resolutions again. The thing is, I don't think we'd be thinking about it if we weren't just constantly bombarded with messaging about New Year's resolutions and what we should be doing. I'd probably happily just come into January and not even think about it one bit. But we are bombarded with it. And in fairness, you're right. I think, you know, it is definitely a nice thing to do to think, okay, new year, 2025, what is going to bring? And we also know from behavioral science that the idea of a fresh start. So if you want to change habits, if you want to do something different, having a fresh start, as in a specific moment where something changes and you really make that decision to change, like New Year's Day or, you know, a big birthday or something like that. We know that fresh start effect actually does work. There's loads of research and evidence about that. Actually, there's a really good book by behavioral scientist Katie Milkman, and I really recommend it. Actually, if you're into that kind of thing, it's really good. It's well written, lots of nice stories in it, and lots of the kind of the evidence base behind it. However, and even she says it in the book, the fresh start doesn't have to be New Year's Day. You can choose a random day in the year for your fresh start. And I think that's what I despise about New Year's resolutions. The idea that all of us are all, you know, in this same boat where we are all ready to change and all ready to set ourselves up to achieve more for this year and do things differently. Do you know? So, because of course we've all had a very different year before us and lots of different challenges ahead of us. So, and who knows, you might be, you know, I remember a couple of years ago having had COVID over Christmas and feeling absolutely rotten and thinking the last thing I want to do now is set new goals for 20, whatever it was, you know. So
I totally agree. And I think, you know, it feels a bit forced doing it at the start of the year. For some of us, we're still recovering from the festivities. You know, it can be pretty full on around festive times for people that are involved in that kind of thing for lots of different reasons. Some of it's really positive. Some people find that time of year really hard. And I think the last thing we need is this added pressure of new year, new me. Like I feel like as well, maybe I'm a bit cynical on this front, but I feel like a lot of it is a bit of a marketing ploy as well. Like, what can we change? What can we consume more of or do differently? And then there's Black Monday in January as well, which was a marketing tool developed by travel companies, because that's where most people book their holidays, because it's so, well, especially in the Northern Hemisphere or Southern, I should know that. But wherever we are, we're in the UK where it's dark. There's a lot of thinking about sunshine. We're not. Thank you. We're thinking about sunshine and vitamin D and all of that jazz.
Yeah.
So I feel like my mission the last few years from a psychology perspective has been giving people permission to not feel like they have to have New Year's resolutions. And I'm not saying don't set yourself goals. I'm not saying
Big time.
Don't focus on what's important to you or what you want to develop, or because I think that's important in life. Like working towards something can be really meaningful. It can, help us, especially if we're tapping into like intrinsic motivation, so stuff that's really important for us.
Yeah.
It can help us keep moving forward. It can help us feel better. It can help us perform better as well. So I'm not against goals. And it's also the word resolution.
Yeah.
Also niggles at me a little bit because it's kind of got that context of we've been doing something wrong, or
it's judgy.
Not enough. It's very judgy.
Yeah.
Very
like
judgy.
judgy.
And we do not. No, exactly. And I think that is partly what I find so hard about it as well.
Yeah.
And I would imagine there are lots of people in the same boat. And even though I know that I don't need to set New Year's resolutions, it doesn't have to be this time of year. Like exactly as you say, we can change things at any point in time that fits with us, our lives, our context, what's going on for us. I still have that in the back of my mind. I think as well, because I start planning work for the year. But in reality, like my children don't go back to school until the 8th of Jan. So I'm not getting a lot done until mid-Jan anyway. By the time I could have started this planning in December. I didn't. I could have done. But again, why does my year have to go from January to December? It doesn't have to.
No, it doesn't.
You can introduce stuff at any point in the year or change things at any point in the year,
Yeah.
in a work context or personal context. So what's our alternative then? Because what we have to be very careful of, I guess, is saying what we don't like. We need to have alternative ways of doing things and thinking, which I think we've come up with over the last few years.
Yeah.
Because we've been having these discussions about what do we do instead of this over the last few years. So where would you start with that?
I start with asking myself, instead of saying to myself, what do I need to achieve this year? I just cut out the to achieve and I think, what do I need this year? And that all sounds very self-centered or kind of introspective, but actually that's good, because if you start with thinking about what it is that you need from the year ahead, rather than thinking about what you think you should be doing, then you'll set yourself up better. So like I kind of do a couple of steps with this. And I remember this actually that very year that I'd had COVID and I was pretty sick over the course of January. And that was when I first kind of had this sort of slight change in tack on setting myself goals in New Year. And I think that the steps are, if you're thinking about what you need, then you ask yourself, well, first of all, what actually will success look like to me in 2025? What are the things that will be, when I get to the end of 2025, what are the things that I'll be most proud of, that will be meaningful to me? And with that, then you think to yourself, well, what resources do I need to make that happen? So again, it's not like, what are all the things that I have to do? What are all the things that I have to achieve? It's more, what do I need to equip myself with this year? That's the starting point. And along with that, exactly as you already said, it's then you're thinking more about intrinsic reward. You're thinking about the things that are meaningful to you. So what's important to you this year, rather than what do you think you need to achieve? What do you think you should be doing?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then I think, I can't, when you ask yourself the question, what do you need? I can't leave our friend mindfulness out, because it's also a reminder to not just think about what do I need in the long term. It's also thinking about what do I need right now. So a reminder to constantly check in with yourself as you go about, and of course, as part of this process, you'll still probably set yourself things that you would like to do and things that you would like to achieve, but it's more in your own terms rather than what you think you should be doing. But you have to, as we've already discussed so many times, but I think it's worth saying over and over again, probably daily, we have to bring ourselves back to thinking, right, hang on a second, am I getting carried away with the rat race here?
Mm-hmm.
And if I am, how do I stop myself? How do I tune into what's going on for me? How do I tune into what it is that I actually need and what's important to me here today and what I'm trying to achieve in the long run? And I think you can only do that if you're doing that every day and if you're really equipping yourself that way. So that's kind of That's one of the things that I think about at the beginning of the year. Instead of my starting point being about what I'm trying to achieve, my starting point is more about what am I equipping myself with? What is important to me? What do I need?
I think that's a great place to start, because so often we work the other way. So we work backwards. We think this is the thing that I want to achieve or should achieve or need to achieve, because a lot of that comes into this as well. And then we work backwards. So we think about, okay, well, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this. But actually, it's a really good point, because if we aren't equipped to do that, if we do not have the resources, so things like time, motivation, sometimes it could be financial resources. If you're thinking about investing in something or taking a qualification, and it could even be things like having the mental capacity to do something, and the space and the energy to do something. If we don't have those things, then we're probably never going to achieve those goals that we're setting ourselves. So we're kind of setting ourselves up for a bit of a fall and some disappointment down the line. So I really like this idea of thinking about what you need firstly, and then potentially building goals or achievement points out of that. I think that's a really healthy way, a healthy way of looking at life and progressing and moving forward, but in a sustainable and healthy way.
And it might be that you check in with yourself and ask yourself that question, and the answer actually is, I need and I want to achieve something brilliant this year, and as part of that
100%.
I'm going to push myself really hard to do it. So that's absolutely fine. It's not, I do think our little corner of podcast world is our starting point is always going to be about having compassion, letting ourselves off the hook, But on the flip side of that, we're never here to say that if you want to achieve something brilliant, don't do it. I mean, absolutely.
100%.
You just have to make sure, as you say, you're equipped with the right resources to get there, and that you're going to be okay the whole way through. And I think we absolutely have to start ourselves there.
I think that's a really good point as well. Because we talk a lot about doing things in our own way, playing our own game, doing things slowly if you want to. But equally, there are times where we need to push in life as well, or we've got the resources to push forward, achieve things in life. And we've both been in positions like that. We've had points in our lives and careers where we've taken on loads and really kind of taken, there are years where both of us have taken massive strides, either in our personal lives or our careers. But what we're saying is not every year is that year. And also, it doesn't always start on the 1st of January. It could start on 100%. The 30th of March. I don't know. But that's the point. The point is, do this stuff at a time that works for you. Yeah. And make sure you're looking after yourself in the process as well, to make sure that actually I wrote an article recently about why how to rest for success. So rest can be your superpower. So think about athletes training. Rest is a really important part of their strategy. It's not just about pushing, training, exerting themselves. And actually, if we can use the same approach in our lives, of course, if we're resting more, we're looking after our well-being. That goes without saying. We all know that bit. But it actually can really help our performance as well, because you are preparing yourself for the next stride, for the next pushing yourself piece. And I think that's a really healthy way to look at achieving goals and performance and potentially reaching peak performance. But looking at things that help both our performance and what we can achieve, but also helping our well-being at the same time as well. I mean, that's the perfect combo, isn't it?
I love that. The idea that reframe in our collective narrative that resting is actually productive. I mean, I just think
100%.
It's so true. It's absolutely true. But how uncomfortable so many of us feel when we are resting. There's always that niggle, should be doing more, could be doing more. But yet, actually, no, resting is literally part of the process and is essential. Now, it's sometimes not possible, if you're someone who's working long hours, has small children, there's generally very little time to actually rest. But when you do get those moments, absolutely take them. Always
100%.
take them.
And also, it doesn't have to be massive. Like, we know sleep is, we know the power of sleep. We know how important that is. Or, lots of people do. There's a lot of that. And I talked about this bit before, why we sleep, podcast before, and the extreme reaction I had to that, because the research is amazing and it's so compelling, like why sleep is so important for us. But I had very young children when I read it, so I was left scared stiff. I actually, just when reading the intro, I was like, oh my goodness, like, I've said this before, my children are actually killing me. This is what it says. And I remember saying to my husband, I was like, read this stuff in the book. If I don't sleep enough, this is what's happening to my body. And I was like, oh my God, the kids are actually literally killing us day by day. Obviously, there must be some kind of evolutionary way of working around that. Like, for people that do have children, I don't know.
But I find it amazing that it never gets mentioned in all of the discourse on sleep. The fact that, there's still a huge chunk of the population at all times who have children, have small children, are missing out on sleep completely. They might be doing all the right things with their sleep habits, but they've got kids.
It's out of your
anyway,
control. And think about people who are like insomniacs, or people who had like extreme hormonal changes, for example. That can affect your sleep. Like, there's a whole host of it. So but the good thing I'd say about resting and thinking about rest is, it doesn't have to be big periods of sleep. It could be restful activities, like taking a break, like power naps are really good for us as well. Like, they're kept fairly short. I had to, funnily enough, power naps, I had to have quite a lot of power naps when I was writing my thesis for my doctorate. It's really interesting. So I'd kind of beaver away, really thinking about, because it's really, some of the stuff is really complex, and it would take me, it could take, and I'm not exaggerating here, it could take an hour to write a paragraph. It could take me 30 minutes to write a sentence, to try and piece together all these different bits of information and research and try and figure out how that all fitted together in the way that I was thinking about things. And I genuinely, quite frequently, had to, in the afternoon, take a 20-minute power nap, because my brain was so frazzled, and I guess I had to process all that information. But it's interesting what your body needs. And I feel like, anyway, so what the point here is that we don't always have to push. Sometimes we can pull back. However, what I will say is something I found really useful from both a theory perspective, like psychology theory, but also from a practical perspective, i.e. it actually works when you're trying to achieve goals, is this idea of mental contrasting.
Tell us about that.
And it's something I've talked about before in articles, especially around the time of year people might be thinking about setting goals. And the idea is there are a few really simple steps. Anyone can do this at any point. So if you are in the process of setting yourself goals at the moment, whether it be New Year, whether it be any time of year, this is something I really recommend. So the idea is, you visualize your success. So you visualize what that goal is that you want to achieve. Think about things like, what will my life be like? What will it feel like? What will I be doing day to day? Because what you're doing here is tapping into your values, like why it's important to you. So, imagine you want to achieve a new career goal. You've set yourself, it might be a promotion or a change in career. And you think about what your life will actually look like when you get there. And the chances are, if it's a goal you're setting yourself, it's going to be positive. It's going to feel good. It might give you a bit more flexibility or a bit more creativity in terms of an outlet, or it could be something you're really interested in. So for whatever reason, think about, really visualize what it's going to feel like when you achieve that goal. The next step is to then really think about where you are now and what you're experiencing now, because the chances are that is going to be different to how you're going to feel or what your days are going to look like when you achieve your goal. And it's that gap, thinking about that gap, that is the contrasting part. So the contrasting is thinking about, or really reflecting on, the gap between what it is you want to achieve and tapping into that, why it's important, and where you are now. And it's that gap and thinking about that, considering that, reflecting on it, that is your motivation. And because you've started from a point of why it's important to you, i.e. what it's going to feel like, what your days are going to look like, what it's going to allow you to achieve, the stuff that's really important to you. So it's tapping into your values. So because that gap is values-based, you're tapping into intrinsic motivation. So it's not someone saying to you, you need to take this next step in your career, and these are the things that you're going to have to do. Or this is the next step you need to take. You tell me what you need to do to get there. Because that may not be your goal. It may not be important to you. But because we're not starting from that place, we're starting from what's important to you, it taps into intrinsic motivation. And it's that motivation that can keep you going on days where it's really hard. Because we've all been there. We've all had these goals that we've set ourselves.
Big time.
And it's really hard every day. You know, I think about my doctor. It's really blooming hard every day to keep going when you're so deep and it's never ending and you're so deep in something. And the whole time, you know, I'm thinking the whole time, I don't know if I can do this. I just don't know if I'm cut out for this. But it's that you've got to imagine that gap. We don't have to, but good advice is to imagine that gap to keep pushing forward. But what I'll also say, there's another step to this. Think about the obstacles, because if you can identify things that might get in your way, you can think about how you might tackle those obstacles in advance. So things like, you know, I might lose motivation. I might get too busy with my current job. My family demands are really high at the moment. I'm going to struggle to commit time to that. And what you can do is you can either think about things that can help tackle that. So this is obviously going to be very different for everyone, but it could be things like, I'm going to set aside 2 hours every weekend to go to a library and work on this. So I'm going to set aside time every day. Or you might think, actually, that goal's really important, but now isn't the right time. Exactly as you were saying at the start of this session, I don't quite have the resources at the moment. I might just need to wait until, I don't know, think about things, until the children start school, or until I might need to do this over a larger time frame. I'm not realistic. I can't get this done in 6 months. Maybe I need a year. Maybe I need 18 months. But you can start to rearrange either your resources, so you've got the resources to be able to reach that goal, or rearrange your goal. Be like, actually, maybe it's not now. Maybe it's later. Or maybe it's not like that. Maybe it's like this. So that's a technique that I really love. So anyone that is kind of in their goal setting mode, totally recommend that approach.
I love that, because so often when we think about goal setting, we think about the fanfare of the achievement of the goal, which of course is wonderful, but the reality, thinking more deeply about the reality of your life in the day-to-day, both when you do achieve the goal and on the path to getting there, is more what your brain needs. Your brain needs to get deep down into that reality and to visualize and think about, you know, my experience right now versus my experience then. That'll be better. And that's why it's important for me to work towards that goal, rather than I'll get loads of external validation, which lasts about 5 minutes. You know?
Yep.
I love that. And I love the idea of thinking about obstacles, because those are the things that'll throw us off track.
They will. And I think you've got to be careful not to go too far down the route of obstacles, because it could put you off. But then maybe sometimes that's a good thing. Maybe maybe then we're not setting ourselves up to fail. Maybe. So it is kind of, you do have to, we talk about this quite a lot, don't we, in the podcast, like have a bit of judgment, a bit of critical thinking. You know, is this my inner fear talking here? Because I think I'm never going to be able to achieve. And we need to find ways to work around that. And that's probably a whole different topic in itself, I'd say, in terms of a podcast. But
let's put a pin in that for sure. Definitely.
Let's put a pin in that. As I was thinking that, I was like, oh,
yes,
I've definitely been in that position. So we do need to be careful of that as well. But I think not overly focusing on obstacles is probably important as well. But being realistic. And what I love about this approach is it's realistic. So it's not this toxic positivity, or we're not setting ourselves up, just been, you know, I have been in this position before as well. I've set these like massive goals. I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to achieve it. It's just going to happen. Like, I'm going to manifest this. Or I just think about it and it will just happen. And life doesn't work like that. We have to put the work in. So thinking about the obstacles helps us to put the work in, because we're thinking about how to tackle those in advance. But also thinking about that gap, our motivation helps us to put the work in to make this stuff happen as well.
Definitely. And that's really, that's what it all comes down to is motivation and setting yourself up to be motivated along the way, even on the hard days. So
yeah. And there will be hard days. Nothing is linear. Nothing I've ever achieved in life has ever been linear. Nothing. There's not one thing that I've done. It's this step, then this step, then this step, then this step. No obstacles in my way. Sailed through, followed the process, and it all worked out perfectly. I can't think of one thing that I've done that's worked like that.
Sadly not. It would be nice, wouldn't it?
The odd thing would be nice. For sure.
Do you know what else I was thinking about with New Year as well, just to kind of hone in particularly on some of the stuff around well-being, fitness, because that's another thing that obviously a big industry around all of that in New Year, and that can get really, in my opinion, very toxic. So just a simple thing that I think is worthwhile doing, I personally find it helpful, is to just ask yourself, what does well-being look like to me this year? Because well-being is an enormous concept to get your head around. Well-being, on so many different levels, there's lots of different things all piled into one. And of course, we are so knowledgeable now we have access to so much information about all the things that, again, we should be doing to equip our well-being. But you know what? Some of those things aren't relevant to us every day or to us in a particular year. And I think just asking yourself, what does well-being look like to me this year? And well-being to me might look like getting out for a walk in the mountains once a week. Or I always think well-being, for me anyway, it's always being able to show up for what I want to do. Just being able to show up. And by that, I mean being able to be there, present, and whether that is for something that I'm doing for work or something that I'm doing with my friends or something that I'm doing with my family, that I'm actually able to be there and to be well for it and to feel, motivated to participate. Because yourself, obviously, an indicator of well-being not being so good is often you're showing up to these things, but you're not there. You're kind of not really showing up. You're showing up in person, but you're not really showing up. So, and I think getting a bit specific about that in my head helps me work out, well, what do I need to do? What are the things that I need? Again, what are the things I need to resource myself with to get my well-being into that state? And sometimes that means making sure that I'm resting more. Sometimes that means doing a particular type of exercise. For me, sometimes it is more steps, more cardio. I still have an interesting relationship with trying to do all this weight stuff because I know that's what we should be doing now. All the evidence is about weightlifting and strengthening. I struggle to do that without injuring myself. But anyway, that is probably one of my things for 25 that I would quite like to get a little bit of a handle on. But you're never going to be an absolute beacon of well-being in all of the ways that we see advertised to us. So you have to choose, okay, what is it to me and what am I focusing on?
I agree. I totally agree. And I love this idea of what do I need to be able to show up? Because that is, I think, really the perfect definition of being a well-being. Like being able to show up, because there are so many things that can stop that. It could be psychological, what's going on with us. Yeah. It could be physical, what's going on. So, and it's going to be very different for everyone, and it'll be different for everyone at different times as well. Yeah. So I like this idea of, not just in the start of the year, but throughout the year. Maybe it's once a month we're reflecting on, what do I need to be a well person? What do I need to be able to show up in the way that I want to be there? I think that's a brilliant reflection point. And I'm not sure, I'm trying to think where I am with that at the moment. And I'm not even thinking about 2025 in general. I'm just thinking about where I am at the moment with that. And I think a lot of that for me at the moment is about being more present. And it's something that I massively want to think about, not just for this year, but in general, I want to build more of this into my life. So I've been delving quite deep, as you well know, actually. I have been delving very deeply into Stoic philosophy.
Oh, I'm really looking forward to your Stoic transformation, by the way.
I know, me too.
I'm so here for it.
Me too. I can't wait. I don't know if I'm going to be a Greek Stoic or a Roman Stoic yet, because there are different options and they're slightly different as well. I'm thinking more Greek.
Love it.
And maybe there's, maybe we need to go back to Athens so I can explore this.
We definitely
do more research whilst I'm there.
100%.
So I think I'll go Greek, although I do really love Rome as well. But anyway, I digress. And there, Stoicism is not what we think it is. We think it's stiff upper lip, typically very, I was going to say very British, but I don't know if it's very English, actually. I feel like in Ireland, you might have a slightly better relationship. And maybe like Wales and Scotland, like a slightly better relationship with this not having to be pushing through all the time. I don't know. I might be wrong on that front. But certainly, I live in England, and it's a very traditional way of thinking about getting through challenges. You push through, you're very stoic. That's not what Stoicism is at all.
No.
At all. And I'm not going to go into the whole philosophy now, because again, we could totally put a pin in this one, because I could do a whole series.
I'd love to. I want to delve really deep into this one. I really do. This is great.
I love it as a philosophy. So where this has come from with me is that my research topic is resilience. So what do we need to navigate challenges effectively, learn from those challenges to grow? And Stoicism the philosophies can be a part of that. So things like how we deal with challenges, how we set ourselves up to deal with challenges. So kind of they have this idea of like inoculating yourself against future challenges. And there are loads of different principles of this, but one of them is focusing more on the present. And I feel like sometimes with goal setting, and if we're really focused on where we're going, we're really focused on what we want to achieve, our thoughts are in the future. So from a psychology perspective, if our thoughts are very much in the future, that can set us up for anxiety. So thinking about what could happen, what might happen. And on the flip side, if our thoughts are very much in the past, that can sometimes lead to depression, where we're thinking constantly about something that's been quite hard in the past. I'm not saying they're the only ways that we experience things like anxiety and depression, by the way. But this really resonates with me, because I have had periods in my life where I've had a big goal, something I'm trying to achieve for whatever reason. It's important to me. But it has caused anxiety and also burnout. I went through a really bad phase of burnout, which again I think is a topic we need to spend a while tackling.
We're creating our whole list of 2025 podcasts here, by the way.
I know. I was going to give out the email address of people's questions, but you know what? I might just not do that. We'll just do it. No,
We've already got our own topics.
We've already got our own topic, so please put your questions about that. No, I'm only joking. Like, please tell us what you're interested in. And the email address, whilst we're on that note, is hello@psychologyintheworld.com. So tell us what psychology, mindset, life topics you'd like us to tackle. So yes, the idea is if we're already always thinking about the future, it can cause anxiety, because we might not know how to get there. There's a whole lot of change, uncertainty. We've got to tackle obstacles that are going to pop up in the way. And I think from a Stoic perspective, it's not that they're it's not that they were, these philosophers, anti-goals or anti-achievement at all. It's just that they were also very conscious of focusing on being in the present as well and enjoying the present moment, which, is early mindfulness, as we've talked about on the podcast so many times. Mindfulness is just about being in the moment, being here now, which is something you said in one of the podcasts. It's just with me all the time now. I'm like, be here now.
It is. So, it's really helpful, isn't it? Because there's such judgment in be mindful. And maybe that's just because it's just so overused as a term these days. But just to say to yourself, be here now. That's much easier.
That's what I need to be a well-being, a better, a more well human, I think. But I do think it does tie into this goal setting. So yes, and expectations and resolutions and what we want to achieve. I feel like have those goals. And I think that keeps people, if you're going to do it, look at mental contrasting, think about goals that matter to you, play your own game, all those things we talk about. But my note of caution with that is try not to have your thoughts and your head constantly in where you're going, because you're going to miss the now. And that's where the stuff that you were just talking about, like how we show up day to day, how we interact with people, and lots of the work I've been doing around like meaning, and that is about connecting to something in the moment, whether it be people, whether it be an activity, it's being in the moment. And so many other things we talk about, like flow and, so many topics we've tackled. It's about being in the moment as well. So that's my kind of note of caution and my Stoic take on how we do goal setting really well.
Love that. Yeah. And I think even if you can just find portions of your day where you can be in the moment, that's the other thing that I've kind of come around to, because I know, again, having young kids, honestly, being here now and being in the moment and being mindful when you're amidst trying to, get through the absolute chaos of toys everywhere, cleaning up after dinner, tantrums, it's, let's be fair, it's hard to be there now when that's happening, because you're literally just kind of going between 5 things at a time.
100%. And also, can I just say there as well, I don't always want to be in that moment. I think I'd like my thoughts to be somewhere else.
Hilarious. Absolutely. Exactly right. And that's fine.
I'm like, I don't want to be here now.
Yeah. And I think, I think that's really important thing to mention as part of all of this, that, sometimes we don't want to be here now. And that's okay, because we're human, But I think then finding other moments, like the other morning we had an awful time here between one thing or another. And then I finally got us out the door to go and just got I just got a nice hot chocolate and sat down together and had a chat about something or other. And we had a lovely few moments. So it's kind of, I didn't want to be here now earlier in the day because it was just really challenging. But it was okay, because later in the day I did find moments that I was like, right, this is kind of calm and peaceful and it's all right. But equally as well, I think that's the other thing about, if you're finding, you mentioned flow there, if you're finding periods in your day where you love being in the absolute focus zone of your work or something creative that you love doing, always give yourself permission to do that and be there. And even if the rest of the day is spent, having to get through loads of tasks and you don't necessarily want to be there for that, but you're there, that's okay. But just make sure that there are other times in the day that you are there and experiencing the here and now, and just, gleaning the value from that. I don't know if that's probably not exactly what the Stoics would say, Gemma. What would you think? I mean, they might try and say to you, no, you have to be there at all the times. But that's how I cope.
The Stoics weren't as strict as we think they were.
Yeah.
And also there were lots of different philosophers that were Stoics. There wasn't one way of doing this. But one thing that I do a lot, and actually I went down a path, before I went down the path of Stoicism, I interviewed an author called William B. Irvine, who's written a lot about Stoicism for another podcast. He's absolutely brilliant. I'm actually reading one of his books at the moment. So he's got a book called The Good Life. He's got a few books on Stoicism that I'm on my second one at the moment. And that's a really interesting interview, because he talks about the fact that Stoics weren't what we think they were. They were actually, they were like the ancient psychologists in lots of ways. And one of the techniques that they used or proposed was this idea of, and it sounds really counterintuitive, so bear with me on this front, but is visualizing when things not going right.
Yeah.
Because, and how painful it would be if you lost something. Because if you remember that day to day, it sometimes can make the dark moments seem bearable. And I'll give you an example of this. And I might have used this before. I probably have used this before in our podcast, because it's something I think about quite frequently. And actually, I was doing this before I learned that this was a Stoic practice. which is kind of how I got into Stoicism in the first place. But I remember when my children were really little and getting up in the night with them, for anyone that's ever done that, is brutal. Like 1 or 2 nights is probably okay. Probably even a week is probably okay. But when it's night after night after night after night, and you feel like you just can't catch a break and you're exhausted, you don't know what you're doing. Because obviously there's so much learning with a new baby, especially if it's your first one, or even if it's your second one or third. Like, you're learning then how to have 2 babies or 2 children, or you're learning, like, there's always so much learning involved.
And they're different.
They're different, and you never catch a break. It's not like you've got time to plan this stuff, how you're going to tackle stuff. Things happen all the time we have to react to, and I find that really overwhelming. But getting up in the night is really hard when it's nice, especially, I just think, God, in the winter, and especially when they're teeny tiny and you've got to feed them. You've also got to change their nappy and they don't want to get cold. And can you remember those nights where you had to literally drag yourself up and you'd be in such a deep sleep because you need it so badly.
Yeah.
But the baby needs feeding. And I used to frequently think about, as I was feeding them, okay, I'm not enjoying the process of dragging myself up, but one day they're going to leave home and they're going to be traveling the world or going to university, or they're going to have their own families, but they're not going to be in my house anymore. And I was imagining I would probably give anything to have them in my house every night again one day, even though right now it feels overwhelming. And I'm probably going to miss those cuddles when they're a baby. And I do. They're 5 and 7 now. And I do think about, God, it was so overwhelming to have a child on me the whole time. I genuinely found that so hard. But I frequently think about now, I'd love a day like that where I'm just feeding them and cuddling them and playing. And just, just have a day of going back to that. But it's something I used to do really frequently in the middle of the night whilst I was feeding them. And it helped me appreciate the moment of doing that, even though it was really hard.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm amazing, like I've nailed parents. I really haven't. Like, I would love people to come and watch me for 24 hours in my house with my children. It is not like, I'm not amazing at this stuff.
Has anyone nailed parenting, Gemma? Anyone? No.
That we need something. We have to talk about expectations, but let's go back to that as well.
Yeah.
But that's actually a Stoic practice. The idea of, well, imagine I didn't have this. Imagine I couldn't, I was thinking one day they're going to go. I mean, Stoics actually go a stage further and they think about, things not existing anymore, and I can't always let my head go there. But think about that, like when you're goal setting as well. Okay, it feels really hard that I've got to work on this thing every week, or I'm trying to squeeze this in and I don't know what I'm doing. I'm out of my comfort zone. But actually, imagine if I've never got the opportunity of achieving that thing that's really important to me. Imagine how horrible that would be, or how horrible that would feel. But they also look at, imagine the simple things you have right now in your life. The simple things, some of your relationships with friends or family, or a job that's mediocre and not floating your boat every day. But imagine those things just disappeared overnight. There might be an element of that we would miss. And it makes you grateful for some of the stuff that you've got, which I really like.
Yeah. And anything that can help you in that moment of challenge that feels incredibly uncomfortable, anything that can help you kind of go, okay, this is hard, but, there's a reason for it. And it's the thing that probably ultimately is going to bring me meaning. And, that
and actually,
does
that's a really good point about achieving goals as well. Have you ever experienced this where you have really wanted to do something, put loads and loads of work into it, you've done it, and then feel really empty?
Yes.
Yeah, me too. So many times. To the point where I actually prep myself now for when that happens. Many times.
You really helpfully prepared me for that, like with a couple of things over the last few years, where it's like, whether it's, we both work on LinkedIn learning courses and publish LinkedIn learning courses, and you had been working on it well before me. And so after, when, the amount of work that goes into making one of those courses, especially when it's your first one, and I, you kind of expect all sorts of fireworks to explode when the course releases, and it's literally such an anticlimax.
Crickets.
Because it's just like, it's in the library now, and that's it, really. Now, there are moments, actually, what you learn, and now what I've realized after that is where I actually get the meaning now is when somebody messages me to say that they'd really found value in the course or had learned something new or really enjoyed taking the course. That's the time when I go, oh, I get that like little kind of spark of meaning or joy. It's so nice to feel like you've added value to someone's life in some way, shape, or form. But it was so helpful that you had prepared me for that, because there's so many examples of that in life. I mean, that's kind of a clear cut one, but there's so many examples of that when you work towards something and then you expect, yay, fireworks, and it's like, okay, that it came and went, and nothing.
So
I feel nothing.
So from that, I've learned you have to find the meaning can't be about achieving the goal.
No.
I mean, 100% congratulate yourself, like putting hard work into something, getting somewhere. We should be celebrating that stuff 100%, but it doesn't matter what other people think about it at that stage. It just matters that you've achieved something that you set out to do. That's what we need to be celebrating. Yeah. But also we need to be finding meaning in the process of achieving that goal, which again comes back to what we were talking about at the start. Make sure your goals are aligned with your values and matter to you for whatever reason. It could be, we're not just talking work goals here. We're talking any goal in general, but I think we need to be celebrating progress towards those goals. And even if we don't achieve them, I think it's the journey that needs to be more meaningful and celebrated over that end goal.
To bring this into kind of maybe a context or like, I don't know, a phenomenon, if you can call this a phenomenon, that people might kind of understand is one of my courses on LinkedIn Learning is about how to find success and fulfillment using an entrepreneurial way of thinking, right? Because so entrepreneurs, obviously, you think of them, when you think of an entrepreneur, you think of somebody who's like achieving big success through starting a business. But what they actually have to do is exactly this, because so I've studied entrepreneurial people over the years, and what I realized, both in the pure sense, but also in the sense of people who are really entrepreneurial in the way they operate, even in a big organization, entrepreneurial people do not have to just be startup founders. I find entrepreneurs everywhere in, large public sector organizations, for example. You find entrepreneurial thinking there too. And one of the markers of entrepreneurial thinking is the ability to find motivation in the day-to-day and meaning in the day-to-day. Because if you think about an entrepreneur in the pure sense, often they are people who have set themselves a goal, and like a lot of the small businesses don't end up making money for years. And so financial reward can't be their motivation. It just can't be, in the same way as it is for people who are earning a salary once a month. At least, often sometimes when you're trucking on through a hard day at work, often payday is often at least around the corner. Whereas for people who are starting businesses, payday might not be for years. And yes, there is the chance of payday being a big payday, but oftentimes it isn't. So they have to find, one of the ways that I talk about them finding motivation is to literally look at their intrinsic reward, look at what motivates them in the day-to-day. And I think that's something I absolutely learned from working with entrepreneurial people along over the years, is just thinking to myself about, if there's a hard goal I'm trying to achieve, if there's something that feels a long time away, don't think about the goal too much. Think about the little actions I'm taking in the day-to-day, and what part of the process is bringing me intrinsic reward. And so often that is things like, for example, us doing this podcast, things like working with great people. That's, again, that's a massive thing that entrepreneurial people get right. They always find really great people to work with, because that's partly because, of course, they recognize working with great people is going to bring success ultimately. But it's also because we get motivated and rewarded in the day-to-day from working with great people. So yeah, that's something we
Agreed.
definitely. I think that's probably. I wonder. There is probably an alignment there between Stoicism and entrepreneurialism.
I would say so. 100%. It
I'd never
sounds
thought
like
of
it.
that
And
before.
not that I'm a Stoic expert yet, by the way, because, you know, I'm starting this journey, which I'm sure people are going to hear a lot about as we go through
We're here for
2025.
you. We're here on this journey. I love it. I really want to learn more about it because it sounds so resonant and like what we need. I heard something yesterday about the fact that human beings we've evolved. So we've already evolved as far as we can cognitively, intellectually. Our next evolution has to be spiritual. And I quite like that because
Oh my goodness.
I think
Yeah.
I feel I'm kind of feeling that myself at the moment. I feel
Yeah.
like we're maybe tipping ourselves a little too far on the old cognitive intellectual evolution. We really need to rein that one back a little bit actually right now. But we probably could do with some spiritual evolving.
Well,
I don't know what that looks
with
like.
the Stoicism. I don't know what that looks like either.
Yeah. So, right. Well, we've set ourselves up now to thinking about a lot of things in 2025. I don't think we actually intended to do that. We've made ourselves a bit of a to-do list.
I also feel like, have we just set ourselves loads of resolutions? No, we haven't. We're not like, we're going to change this. We're going to...
There are no resolutions here.
They're just guides, things we're going to think about.
Things we're thinking about, how we're equipping ourselves with what we need, how we're finding motivation in the day-to-day, because that's what it's all down to, how we're equipping ourselves in the day-to-day with what we need and, you know, what well-being is to us, all of these good things. None of those things are resolutions. They are just checking in with ourselves and setting ourselves up to be the best we can be.
Love it. And on that note, I think we should say, until next time, stay safe in the wild.
Till next time, Gemma.